The sound of shattering ceramic echoed through the quiet cul-de-sac, followed by a blood-curdling scream that could only belong to one person: Margaret Holloway, the most notorious HOA Karen in Pinewood Estates. Her perfectly manicured hand was clutching a broken teacup, its delicate porcelain fragments scattered across her immaculate white marble countertop like fallen snowflakes. "They can't do this," she shrieked, her face turning an alarming shade of crimson that clashed magnificently with her pastel pink cardigan. The object of her meltdown was a simple letter. Well, not so simple to Margaret. Her next-door neighbor, Alex Rodriguez, had submitted formal documentation to remove the in-ground swimming pool from his backyard. To most, this would be a non-event. To Margaret, it was a declaration of war. She had spent years meticulously monitoring every square inch of the neighborhood. Each blade of grass, each fence picket, each decorative lawn ornament was subject to her hawk-like scrutiny. The swimming pool had been her personal project of contention for years. When Alex and his family first moved in 5 years ago, Margaret had immediately begun a campaign of passive-aggressive notes, strategic complaints, and bylaw citations. The pool, in her view, was an aesthetic disaster. It wasn't the pool itself, which was actually a well-maintained classic rectangular design, but the principle. Alex had refused to paint the pool deck the specific shade of taupe that Margaret believed was mandated by the neighborhood's unwritten rules. His pool parties were too loud, the children's laughter too boisterous, and the occasional beach ball that sailed over the fence was a personal affront to her sense of order. Now he was removing the pool entirely. Margaret's trembling fingers reached for her phone. She would not let this stand. The neighborhood's aesthetic integrity was at stake. Her reputation as the self-appointed guardian of Pinewood Estate's pristine image hung in the balance. "Hello, HOA board," she said, her voice a dangerous mixture of honey and venom. "We need to have an emergency meeting about 1247 Maple Grove." Little did Alex know, Margaret Holloway was about to unleash a storm that would make a Category 5 hurricane look like a gentle breeze. The first phase of her plan was simple: documentation. She would create such an extensive file of complaints and potential violations that the HOA would have no choice but to intervene. Her meticulously organized binder, color-coded, tabbed, and filled with photographs taken from various strategic vantage points, was already waiting. Margaret adjusted her reading glasses and began to compose an email that would set her intricate plan in motion. Each keystroke was a calculated weapon, each paragraph a potential legal landmine. The neighborhood would never be the same. Alex Rodriguez discovered Margaret's first salvo on a crisp Tuesday morning. Tucked between his meticulously maintained garbage bins was a certified letter, its official-looking envelope practically vibrating with bureaucratic menace. He recognized the HOA letterhead instantly, and Margaret's unmistakable perfectionist handwriting. Violation notice. Unauthorized pool deconstruction project, the document proclaimed in bold, authoritative type. His wife, Alina, peered over his shoulder, her eyebrow raised in a mixture of amusement and irritation. "She's really doing this? Over a pool removal?" The backstory was complicated. Alex had inherited the pool from the previous homeowners, a relic of suburban excess that had become more maintenance headache than luxury. With 2 growing kids and rising utility costs, the decision to remove the pool had been carefully considered. What should have been a simple home improvement project had now become a full-blown neighborhood drama. Margaret's letter cited no fewer than 17 potential violations, ranging from the absurd to the completely fabricated. Permit issues, noise ordinances, potential environmental hazards. Each accusation was meticulously typed, each paragraph a calculated attempt to obstruct Alex's plans. "She wants us to submit a full environmental impact assessment," Alex read aloud, his voice a mixture of disbelief and sardonic humor. "For removing a swimming pool." Alina laughed, a sharp, staccato sound that cut through the morning quiet. Only Margaret could turn pool removal into an international incident. But Margaret was just getting started. Her next move was to mobilize the HOA board, a group of retired professionals who took their community governance with deadly seriousness. She knew each member personally, had cultivated relationships over years of strategic baking, carefully timed neighborhood gossip, and an uncanny ability to volunteer for every single committee. At the monthly HOA meeting, Margaret arrived with her trademark precision. Her navy blue blazer was pressed within an inch of its life. Her hair, a helmet of perfectly highlighted blonde, didn't move even when she gestured dramatically. She had prepared a presentation that would make corporate executives weep with its level of detail. "The Rodriguez pool removal," she began, clicking to her first slide, "represents a fundamental threat to our community's architectural integrity." Board members leaned forward. Margaret had a way of making even the most mundane issues sound like potential neighborhood apocalypse. What Margaret didn't know was that Alex was prepared. A civil engineer by profession, he had already secured every possible permit. His documentation was ironclad, his approach methodical. He understood bureaucracy far better than Margaret realized. The battle lines were drawn. What had started as a simple home improvement project was now a full-scale suburban warfare, with Margaret Holloway as the self-appointed general and Alex Rodriguez as the unexpected resistance. Little did Margaret know her next move would backfire in ways she could never have anticipated. The pool removal was about to become the most talked-about event in Pinewood Estates history, and she would be at the center of a storm entirely of her own making. The excavation began on a Monday morning, the rhythmic thud of heavy machinery cutting through the usually tranquil Pinewood Estates neighborhood. Margaret watched from behind her carefully positioned living room curtains, her binoculars trained on the Rodriguez property like a military surveillance operation. "They're destroying the neighborhood's aesthetic," she muttered to her Yorkshire Terrier, Mr. Pickles, who seemed more interested in a chew toy than her impending meltdown. Alex's team worked with military precision. Massive yellow excavators carved into the earth, removing decades of concrete and landscaping with systematic efficiency. Each scoop of dirt was a direct challenge to Margaret's carefully constructed world of suburban perfection. By noon, the HOA board had received no fewer than 17 separate complaint emails from Margaret. Each one was color-coded, cross-referenced, and accompanied by time-stamped photographs documenting what she claimed were multiple code violations. What Margaret didn't anticipate was the level of support Alex was quietly gathering. His next-door neighbor, Karen Thompson, ironically named but fundamentally different from Margaret, had been watching the unfolding drama with growing amusement. Karen had dealt with Margaret's tyrannical hoe tactics for years and was more than ready to see someone stand up to her. "I got your back," Karen texted Alex that afternoon. "I've been collecting documentation about Margaret's own property violations for years. Want me to share?" The text came with a series of photos showing Margaret's own property infractions: an unauthorized garden shed that exceeded height restrictions, rose bushes that extended 6 inches beyond the permitted property line, and a flagpole that violated the HOA's strict flag display guidelines. Alex couldn't help but laugh. The irony was delicious. Meanwhile, Margaret was preparing her nuclear option. She had contacted local authorities, claiming the pool removal constituted a potential environmental hazard. The city inspector arrived mid-afternoon, clipboard in hand, looking distinctly unimpressed. "Ma'am," the inspector said to Margaret, who had cornered him near the Rodriguez property line, "I've reviewed all the permits. Everything is in order." Her face fell. The carefully constructed narrative of neighborhood destruction was crumbling around her. But Margaret Holloway was not one to be defeated easily. As the excavation continued and the massive hole where the pool once stood grew larger, she was already formulating her next move. This was far from over. The neighborhood watched and waited. What would the notorious HOA Karen do next? Little did anyone know, Margaret had a secret weapon. A connection within the city planning department that she had cultivated over years of strategic networking. And she was about to play her most calculated card yet. The pool removal was just the beginning of a conflict that would reshape Pinewood Estates forever. The city planning department was a labyrinth of bureaucracy, and Margaret knew its every hidden corridor. Her cousin, Robert Jennings, had worked there for 27 years before retiring, and he taught her exactly how to navigate the system's most intricate pathways. Her carefully crafted complaint landed on the desk of Assistant Director Marcus Wilkins, a man she'd known since his days as an intern, a fact she never hesitated to remind him about. The file was a masterpiece of administrative manipulation, 17 different infractions, each meticulously documented, each designed to raise red flags. "This is serious," Marcus muttered, pushing his glasses up and leafing through the thick dossier. Margaret's reputation preceded her. She was known as the most persistent and most detailed complainant in the city's history. What Margaret didn't know was that Alex Rodriguez wasn't just any homeowner. As a civil engineer specializing in urban development, he had connections of his own. His work with the city on several sustainable housing projects had earned him a reputation for integrity and precision. The Rodriguez backyard now looked like an archaeological dig site. The pool's skeleton was gradually being revealed. Layers of concrete, decades of history stripped away. Elena had turned it into a family project, with her 2 children, Maya and Jason, helping to document the excavation process. "Look, Dad," Maya called out, holding up a rusted toy truck she discovered buried near the pool's deep end. "Vintage." Alex smiled, knowing each layer told a story. This wasn't just about removing a pool, it was about transformation, about making space for something new. Margaret's next move came via a certified letter to the HOA board. She had discovered an obscure clause in the neighborhood bylaws, a regulation so ancient that it predated most of the current homeowners. According to her interpretation, the pool removal required a full community vote and environmental impact study. The HOA board meeting became a battlefield. "This is ridiculous," growled Frank Henderson, the board's longest-serving member. "We're talking about a pool removal, not a nuclear waste facility." But Margaret was prepared. She arrived with a 3-ring binder color-coded tabs separating each section of her argument. Charts, graphs, photographs. Her presentation was a masterclass in bureaucratic intimidation. The structural integrity of our entire neighborhood could be compromised, she declared, her voice rising with dramatic intensity. Mr. Pickles, who she'd brought in a designer carrier, seemed more interested in a nearby potted plant. Unbeknownst to Margaret, Alex had his own allies. Karen Thompson had been quietly gathering support from other neighbors who were tired of Margaret's constant interference. A secret group chat had been created with screenshots of Margaret's increasingly bizarre complaints becoming a source of neighborhood entertainment. The battle was escalating. What Margaret saw as a principled stand, the neighborhood increasingly viewed as comedic performance art. But Margaret was playing a long game, and her next move would shock everyone. A nuclear option that would push the conflict beyond anything anyone could have anticipated. The nuclear option arrived on a Thursday morning wrapped in an official-looking manila envelope with a return address from the city's Historical Preservation Committee. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she opened it, a mixture of anticipation and barely contained excitement radiating from her every movement. What she discovered was nothing short of bureaucratic gold, a potential historical designation for the Rodriguez property. The pool, she claimed, was not just a pool. It was a significant historical artifact representing mid-century suburban architectural design. The preservation report was a masterpiece of creative interpretation. Paragraphs of dense text suggested the pool might, and Margaret emphasized might, be a rare example of a 1962 pool design that could have historical significance. She commissioned an obscure architectural historian to draft the report, paying out of her own meticulously managed savings. "This is my masterpiece," Margaret whispered to Mr. Pickles, who was more interested in licking his paw. Alex received the notification that same afternoon. Elena caught him staring at the document, his face a mixture of disbelief and grudging admiration. "She did not," Alex muttered, "just try to landmark our swimming pool." The neighborhood was divided. Some neighbors found the entire saga hilarious. Others were genuinely curious about the potential historical significance. Social media was ablaze with memes about the great pool preservation controversy of Pinewood Estates. Karen Thompson, who had been quietly gathering her own intelligence, discovered something Margaret hadn't anticipated. The architectural historian who wrote the report, he was Margaret's second cousin, a detail that would potentially invalidate the entire claim if brought to light. But Margaret was playing a deeper game. The historical preservation claim would force a complete halt to the pool removal. Investigations would take months, potentially years. Every day the process was delayed was a victory in her mind. What Margaret didn't know was that Alex had been documenting everything. Every complaint, every interaction, every ridiculous claim. His background in civil engineering and urban planning gave him a strategic advantage she hadn't considered. The excavation continued, albeit at a slower pace. Maya and Jason Rodriguez had turned the process into a family archaeology project, documenting each layer of dirt, each fragment of history they uncovered. They were learning more about their home's history than Margaret could have ever imagined. "Look, Dad," Maya called out one afternoon, holding up an old coin she discovered near the pool's edge. "I think this might be from the 1960s. Alex examined the coin, a wry smile crossing his face. The irony was not lost on him. They were literally uncovering history while Margaret was trying to manufacture it. The neighborhood watched and waited. Margaret's latest move had raised the stakes dramatically. But nobody, not even Margaret herself, could predict how this would ultimately end. The pool removal had become more than just a home improvement project. It was now a full-blown suburban epic. The final confrontation was nothing like anyone expected. It happened on a crisp Saturday morning with half the neighborhood gathered on the street. The historical preservation claim had brought everything to a standstill, until the day the city's lead historian arrived. Dr. Elizabeth Ramirez was not impressed by Margaret's carefully crafted narrative. A no-nonsense professional with 4 decades of experience, she approached the Rodriguez property with the precision of a surgeon and the skepticism of a seasoned investigator. "Ms. Holloway," Dr. Ramirez said, her voice cutting through the morning air like a knife, "this is perhaps the most creatively constructed historical claim I've ever encountered." Margaret's perfectly coiffed hair seemed to deflate slightly. The investigation lasted precisely 3 hours. Dr. Ramirez methodically examined every inch of the pool site, interviewed Alex and Alina, reviewed the documentation, and ultimately exposed Margaret's elaborate scheme. The coup de grace came when Dr. Ramirez revealed that Margaret's architectural historian cousin was actually a part-time car salesman with a community college art history class under his belt, not exactly a credible expert. But Margaret wasn't done, not by a long shot. As the city official prepared to give the final approval for the pool removal, Margaret made one last desperate move. She approached the excavation site, Mr. Pickles in his designer carrier, and attempted to physically block the work crew. "You cannot destroy this historical landmark," she shrieked. What happened next would become neighborhood legend. Mr. Pickles, tired of being a prop in Margaret's drama, chose that exact moment to wiggle free. The tiny Yorkshire Terrier darted between the workers' legs, somehow managing to knock over Margaret's meticulously prepared binder of complaints. Papers flew everywhere, creating a snowstorm of bureaucratic chaos. Alex couldn't help himself. He burst out laughing. The neighborhood, which had been holding its collective breath, joined in. Even the work crew struggled to maintain professional composure. Margaret stood there, papers swirling around her like a tornado of defeated dreams, Mr. Pickles yapping triumphantly at her feet. In the weeks that followed, the pool removal was completed. Alex and Elena transformed the space into a beautiful native plant garden, a sustainable project that actually increased the neighborhood's environmental value. Ironically, it was something the HOA board would later praise as a model of responsible landscaping. Margaret was quietly censured by the HOA board. Her endless complaints had become more of a nuisance than a service. Mr. Pickles, meanwhile, became a neighborhood celebrity, the dog who had finally brought down the HOA's most notorious Karen. But, as with all great stories, not everything was resolved. Margaret wasn't defeated, merely redirected. The neighborhood watched and waited, knowing full well that her next target was just a matter of time. The pool was gone, but the legend of the Pinewood Estates pool war was just beginning.